Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the League of American Orchestras for inviting me to speak, and thank you for joining us here in Nashville for this year's conference. I know it hasn't been typical for a music director to speak to conference attendees, but when the League extended the invitation to me, I leapt at the chance. I didn't even have to think twice about whether to accept this opportunity because I know that the time that we will spend together this week is so important. Every single one of us here, whether you're a musician, an administrator, a volunteer, or some combination of those, contributes to the success of our orchestras. And as with the orchestra itself, each of us plays an important role. We all have to work together to shape the outcome. Even if one part is missing, if we're not following the same cues, if we're working from a different interpretation of the big picture, the result will not come together as we intended. So for the next few days, as we participate in the conference sessions, engage in conversation, and take the opportunity to listen and to learn, we'll be invited to think about how to place our communities, our music, and our musicians at the center of the conversation. We will be challenged to identify ways to redefine excellence and to ensure that a diversity of voices are shaping that conversation. We will be asked to think about ways to transform inspiration and innovation into meaningful action. We'll be invited to explore how we can move our historically rich art form forward into the future. And perhaps more important of all, we will be doing it together. With the guidance and leadership of the League, along with the communities we serve, we are all working toward a continually deepening understanding of our shared mission. To achieve artistic excellence, yes, but also of equal importance, to work towards dismantling barriers so that everyone is invited to the conversation and that everyone is served by the work that we do. There's a reason why music should be at the center of this conversation, why it has to be at the center of this conversation. Because music is the humanizing force we need to do this very work, to make all voices be heard and counted, and to transform the wisdom of those collective voices into action. We need to hold tightly to this idea as we go about our work. As tempting as it is to focus on all of the challenges of running a symphony orchestra, our greatest responsibility to our communities is to channel this profound humanizing force of music and use it to create meaningful, lasting, and growing transformation. I cannot imagine life without music. I get the very same rewards from it today than I got when I started at age 11 as a new arrival in Costa Rica, fleeing the instability of my home country in Nicaragua. There was no reason for anybody to expect that I'd become a musician, much less the conductor of a Grammy Award-winning orchestra in the United States. I came from a completely non-musical family. Nobody in my immediate family even knew how to read music. My dad, he was into mariachi music. My mom, Julio Iglesias. Beethoven and Brahms were completely non-existent because we had no awareness of it, much less any access to it. There was no professional orchestra or a youth orchestra where I grew up in Nicaragua. And had civil war not broken out between the Sandinistas and the Somoza regime, I may never have begun my journey as a musician. I vividly remember that we were at an uncle's party in 1978. We lived in León, which was the second largest city in Nicaragua, about 2 hours drive from the capital, Managua. And for many years, there had been all these rumors that the war was coming and that Somoza's days were numbered. That afternoon, as it usually happened in parties in Nicaragua, the parents were drunk and having too much fun until we started hearing gunfire. It was the final coordinated attack by the Sandinistas. Over the next few months, the city was taken and retaken 3, maybe 4 times. There were bombings every day, helicopters, tanks shooting in front of our house. We'd be inside wondering how many people were being killed outside. My parents were not politically involved. Like many others, our family was simply caught in the middle of the conflict. I remember hiding under our bed and watching my mom pray the rosary every night. There were many kidnappings at the same time, and I always remember fearing that knock on the door in the middle of the night. Even as a child, I understood the seriousness of what was happening, and that memory will never leave me. But somehow, we survived. We were running out of food, so my dad would go out, put his life on the line. When the gunfire died down, we'd hear a rumor that some neighborhood, they were giving out milk or water, so he'd tie a white handkerchief on the car antenna and go out looking. I myself got caught one time in the crossfire. I went out to run an errand for my dad, and as luck had it, at the right moment I was in a particular street, the National Guard ran into the rebels and they started shooting at each other. So I had to throw myself under a car. A nearby family was finally able to pull me out to safety after about 2 hours. We lived through many months of this. When the war ended, we hoped that life would go back to normal. But it didn't. And there was a mass exodus from Nicaragua. Leaving was very difficult, but my parents made the decision that they wanted a better life for their children. We took what we could and started a new journey. We were openly welcomed in Costa Rica when we arrived, and I had the privilege that at least my family was together. That wasn't the case for many, many, many families. We were struggling, but we were struggling together. Music helped me make this transition into a new life, starting from nothing. For my parents, it was a way to keep me busy, but it became a lifesaver and an obsession for me. It was as simple as my parents seeing an ad in the newspaper in Costa Rica for the youth orchestra, and they decided to go and sign me up. It was a free government program. I say that I had no musical background, but I did like to sing as a child. My uncles used to pay me for me to sing their favorite tunes. So I guess I've been making a living as a musician longer than I thought. There was some luck involved, though. When my parents went to sign me up for the youth orchestra, they had to show our papers. But when they presented the Nicaraguan passports, we learned that this program was only for Costa Rican citizens. One of the teachers who had done my aptitude test said, "This is unfair. This kid is right here and he deserves a chance." He vouched for me. They were willing to bend the rules because of this teacher's position. Without his intervention, I might not be standing in front of you right now. That first year, I learned to read music, and they made us go watch the rehearsals for both the professional orchestra and the youth orchestra. We didn't get to choose our instruments that first year. That came on the second year. But from the very beginning, it was so inspiring to see people my age so devoted to something. I still feel the same way when I work with young people. Give a kid an instrument, and that violin or that horn, that mallet gives them a voice. It gives them power. It gives them an identity that transcends the one that they were born into. Music quickly became the thing that brought happiness to me, whether that was through the music itself or the people I became associated with. The other kids were so passionate about what we were doing in Youth Symphony, and I became inspired by it. I became a part of it, and more importantly, it became a part of me. Because of my participation in youth orchestra, I never had to deal with any of the negative aspects of being a refugee from Nicaragua. When I joined the ensemble, I became a member of the club. A club whose only basis for membership was a love of music. Granted, there wasn't much else to do. There were only 2 channels on the TV. Early in our life in Costa Rica, the family was struggling financially, but as long as I got to play, I don't even remember it was not something we could not overcome. Even though we always had that hope of returning to our homeland, with every day that passed, it became less and less of a possibility. And at the same time, my participation in the youth orchestra helped me establish strong roots in my new country. Every day that I poured myself into music, that became my grounding force. It became the central part of my life. So I totally get this idea of music centricity. That notion is what defines me. It's what defines all of us who dedicate our lives to music, however we choose to do so. Music is central to who we are. And those bonds that I formed with my friends in youth orchestra, these are still the closest people in my life. You won't be surprised to learn that all of them became successful professional musicians. As a teenager in Costa Rica, I started to form an idea of the United States in my mind. This was the 1980s, and we were getting exposed to popular culture the same way that American kids were receiving it: cable TV. In Costa Rica, though, when basic cable arrived, it only had 9 channels, but we did have MTV and CNN. In youth orchestra, we had this one friend whose family had the full cable package, which included being able to listen to WFMT, Chicago's classical music station. So on the weekends after youth orchestra rehearsals, we would go to his house, and on the weekends sit around to hear live performances of the Chicago Symphony. But every now and then, we would also listen to concerts by the Cleveland Orchestra or the Boston Symphony. We knew who all these players were, the same way that most kids know the players from their baseball cards. Bud Herseth, John Mack, these were our heroes. When we heard them on the radio, it became a real source of inspiration for us. Getting to hear these orchestra musicians perform live on the radio each week was truly incredible. So imagine what it feels like for me now, getting to meet and even conduct some of the same legendary musicians who inspired me as a kid. Everything has come full circle, and I always share this story with them because you may not realize just how far your impact has gone. So remember, as we explore this concept of music centricity over the next few days, that music is not only a centering force, it also makes tremendous ripples that radiate outward in concentric circles. After getting to hear one of the great American orchestras on the radio every Friday or Saturday, when I had the opportunity to study music in the US on scholarship, of course, I took it. My first experience in America was as a freshman at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. I came over as a percussion major, following in the footsteps of other Costa Ricans before me. Baylor made a huge investment in us and took an amazing leap of faith. There were teachers and faculty members who put their hands in the fire for us because they saw possibilities in these young musicians from Latin America. But while they may have seen possibilities in me, I had no clue what I was looking at when I showed up on my first day. I had seen the music videos on MTV, and I had even seen the Challenger explosion on CNN. But honestly, going from San Jose, Costa Rica to Waco, Texas was like going from Earth to Pluto. My English was very, very limited. So most of my introduction to American college life was through marching band. Remember, I had just arrived from Costa Rica. I had never been in a football field before. So when they instructed the drum line to go to the 20-yard line, I remember there was this kid from DeSoto, Texas. His name was Gary, and he started laughing at me really hard. And I'll never forget that voice. He said, "You're not from around here, are you?" I promise you, for those first couple of weeks, I kept running into the tubas and the piccolos. But I eventually figured it out, and I even became a football fan. I also figured out very quickly that Dallas and Houston were within driving distance. I had heard of those orchestras too. So whenever I could afford to, I would catch a ride to those cities and experience those concerts in person. Once again in my life, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, and music became my grounding force. Being surrounded by great musicians, my teachers, my peers, made me realize what was possible. It gave me an idea of what I could achieve through dedication, discipline, and hard work. Many of these same people are still colleagues and friends, and they continue to inspire me. But at that point, all I knew was that I wanted to make music. I didn't even know I wanted to be a conductor. Whether I was going to play or teach or listen, I was just happy being in the back of the band. Over time, as I've had the opportunity to thrive in my career as a conductor, I have come to understand what my greatest teachers and mentors actually instilled in me. Even though I have this privileged position in the front of the orchestra, my job is not simply to lead, but to inspire. And this extends to every aspect of my work as music director. Leadership does not mean telling people what to do. It means being able to express a vision and inviting everyone into a conversation about how, together, we can shape and enact that vision. It means learning from everyone around you and being willing to adapt and evolve for the sake of the greater good. And as we all know, the work of an orchestra goes far beyond of what happens on stage. It resonates out into the audience, to our donors, our volunteers, and to the wider communities we serve. And it is resonating right now, in this room, in the music of the young students we just heard from the Nashville Symphony's Accelerando program. As together, we think about the ways that orchestras can play a role in transforming our world. So if I can do anything today, I hope that I can inspire you to explore your own role in sustaining and expanding the work of our orchestras. Let's take a moment to remember why we are here. It is all about the music. Everything we do, the reason we choose repertoire, soloists, our process for auditioning musicians, our education programs, the work we do to sell tickets and generate public support, all of this should be driven by one thing only: the music. Because the music is what inspires us, and your job, like mine, is to inspire others. The problem, of course, is that not everyone has access to the music, a fact that we're getting better at acknowledging and learning how to address more effectively. In the orchestra world, we used to believe that it was simply enough to perform great music. Sell tickets and people will come. Pipe concerts on the radio, and maybe, just maybe, you might reach the ears of an eager young music student in Costa Rica. We now know that that is not enough. We now are recognizing, decades after the civil rights movement in America, that not everyone has the same opportunities, and that race is one of the defining factors in who has access and who does not. As an industry, we continue to come together and learn how to do better. Thanks to entities like the Sphinx organization, which has been working on behalf of young musicians of color for nearly a quarter of a century, this is not a new conversation. But they cannot create diverse, inclusive orchestras on their own. We all have to embrace and fulfill this work. Every day I am gratified to see that the conversation is growing. More people are listening and more people are responding, and signs of change are becoming more visible. You witnessed one of those on stage just a little while ago. But we still have to do better. And to do better, we have to do more. We have to get beyond thinking that inclusion is somehow special or unique. No, this work is at the very core of our mission and our identities as orchestras. We know that this work requires time. In the case of a program like Accelerando, it will take years. So we have to be patient, but we have to also be relentless. When I think about my own role in this process, much of it comes down to the choices I get to make about who and what we put on our stage. Which composers will we champion? Which artists will we invite? As a Latin American who hails from the two great meccas of classical music, Nicaragua and Costa Rica, my own experience is a reflection of who I am. Again, so much of this comes back for the opportunities I have been given, first in youth orchestra, then at Baylor, and then repeatedly as I've made my way as a conductor to Minnesota, to Oregon, to Nashville, to Wrocław, Poland. I've always been musically curious. As anyone who knows me will tell you, I get every bit as excited about the band Rush as I do about Mahler or Stravinsky. At the same time, after engaging in conversation with my colleagues and peers over the last few years, when I look at the repertoire I've championed as a conductor, I've started to see the gaps. As much as I've treasured working with Joan Tower or Jennifer Higdon, I really have performed the work of very few female composers. The same thing is true when we talk about composers of color. Just in the last couple of years, Florence Price has begun to receive the attention and acclaim that eluded her during her lifetime. This is the woman who once wrote to Kusevitsky, "I have two handicaps, those of sex and race. I am a woman and I have some Negro blood in my veins." This particular story is especially striking because Kusevitsky was one of the great champions of the new music in the 20th century. Our understanding of classical music today was profoundly shaped by his influence. And yet, as far as we know, he never so much as even wrote back to Florence Price. The result? I have conducted hundreds of pieces from the 20th century. I have referred myself and to the Nashville Symphony as champions of American music. And yet, Florence Price's music has never been performed on this stage. I wasn't even familiar with her until recently. Never mind the other composers of color who have contributed to our repertoire. It all comes back to the music and to music centricity. Composers like Florence Price, George Walker, Adolphus Hailstork, Gabriela Lena Frank, Hannibal Locumbe, Jonathan Bailey Holland, and Tania Leon have been routinely pushed to the periphery. It is time to bring them and their music to the center. As music director, this is within my capacity. And it is my job to do this in a way that is meaningful, that makes it integral to the conversation, and to move from a spirit of equity and inclusion to one of belonging. But I will be entirely honest with you. I need help. This is a completely new map for me, and I need to make sure I'm going in the right direction. Remember, none of us is doing this work alone. No matter where we are along the journey, we need to make the journey forward together. We cannot let tradition or fear of change hold us back. How many voices out there are going unheard right now? Who should be working harder to listen to? And what can they tell us about the world we live in? About the parts of the world we don't even know? About the world we are seeking to create? How much richer can our own lives be with this greater knowledge? These questions, yet again, go right to the heart of why we exist. The music. The repertoire is finite. And if there's one thing that orchestras can be accused of, it's repetition ad nauseam. we are coming up on the 250th anniversary of Beethoven, and it is a big deal. But come on, every year is a Beethoven year. Does he really suffer from lack of programming? This guy? And you can say the same about Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky. So tell me, what is the difference between this big anniversary year and every other year? We're going to put Beethoven on our season brochures the next year and the year after that. If we want to make room for new voices and diverse perspectives, we have to expand the repertoire. And we can do that not just by commissioning new work, but by continuing to breathe life into these new works through repeated performances. Every orchestra, no matter the size or the budget, has a role to play. Every orchestra has the ability to share ideas and successes with their peers. That's why we're here together right now. And as I like to remind our own audience here in Nashville, all of this music was new at some point. During Beethoven's lifetime, you were lucky if you got to hear a symphony from him every 5 years. And not all of it was embraced immediately. But you know what? That didn't stop composers from writing new works, and it definitely didn't stop orchestras from performing them, because it was important. So as you confront the question of how to make your ticket sale and fundraising goals while also making room for new music, remember that this challenge has been going on since the beginning of our art form. Our institutions need to take up the mantle. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to challenge convention and come up with creative ways of challenging our audiences. Just enough, of course, so they keep coming back. It is our responsibility to make the exploration of a wider repertoire both exciting and energizing. Whether we are performing Beethoven for the 250th time, or we're giving a world premiere, whether we're upholding the artistry of old dead white guys or young diverse voices, and there is room for both, it's worth remembering that music is more than beautiful melodies and harmonies and solos. It is emotion. When we are performing and promoting the work of a composer, we are conveying what's deep inside their souls. And if we're willing to listen not just with open ears, but with open hearts, we will learn that the things that inspire and frustrate them are often the same things that inspire and frustrate us in everyday life. How we translate that to our audience matters. I have been very fortunate that at each of the orchestras I've been associated with, there has been not just a genuine commitment to nurturing the music, but a high degree of collaboration. Music directors tend to believe that we have all the answers. But if there is anything that my own experience has taught me, is that we don't. I may feel very confident about what happens on stage, but there is so much more to leading an orchestra. It requires all of us working closely together, not just to achieve success, but to define it in the first place. As you participate in the conference this week, and after you return home, remember that your role at your orchestra is valuable, and your own voice matters. I'll even go a step further and tell you this: don't be afraid to challenge your music director. Share ideas, ask questions, explore assumptions, and more importantly, don't give up. Personally, I love that I get to learn something new every day by working with my wonderful colleagues at the Nashville Symphony. Every day we begin from a position of how can we use our shared knowledge for the betterment of our institution? How can we get more people into the hall? How can we eliminate barriers and provide more people with access. How can we make a difference in the work that we do every day? If these questions matter to me and to my colleagues, they should matter just as much to you and your music director. Here's why. When I look back at my own experience, I think about that moment when the Costa Rican official turned down my youth orchestra application because I didn't have the right citizenship papers. I said there was some luck involved, but it was more than luck. The whole reason I am standing in front of you right now is because somebody saw possibilities in me. That teacher spoke up for me and said, this person deserves an opportunity. I have never forgotten that because it reminds me of my own responsibility to create opportunities. Yes, it is true that as we go about our work, we need to keep the music at the center. If we don't, we will quickly lose our way. But at the same time, we need to remember that music is just a tool. It's the tool we use to do our real job, which is reaching, teaching, serving, healing, transforming, and inspiring people. My own journey has taught me that everyone, no matter where they came from, what they look like, what their identity is, everyone deserves that opportunity. I am forever grateful that somebody gave me mine. Thank you.